Hello, my friends. John Peterson from the Arlington Institute, and welcome to Quartet. You've just found yourself in the middle of four of us for the next hour, talking about some of the deep and significant things that are going on in the world in this amazing kind of transition that's working its way through this planet that is going to generate, we all believe, a new world and a new human being. And we're here to talk about some significant aspect of all of that. I'm joined, as I always am, by friends Greg Braden. Hi, Greg. How are you?
John, I'm doing well. I'm coming to you from our studio here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I'm really looking forward to being with everyone today. Thank you all for joining us.
And Penny Kelly from Michigan, one presumes. Looks like Michigan there.
Yes, it's Michigan. Yes. Welcome. Glad to be here.
And Kingsley Dennis from the UK. Hi, Kingsley.
Hello, John. Greetings from the UK and greetings from my pet monkey, who I call Pops.
So let's talk about our topic today. We're going to talk about information and how that information is controlled and how it influences and shapes the reality that we all experience. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story first, but let me start with a quote from Bill Casey. William Casey was the director of Central Intelligence for Ronald Reagan back when I went through the White House a little bit. And Bill Casey was famously said, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the U.S. public believes is false." I had a friend who ran the Central Intelligence Agency. His name was William Colby. And Bill Colby was infamous, some people say, because back in 1975, Frank Church, who's senator from Arizona, I think, had the famous kind of church hearings where he kind of systematically took apart the CIA and the different kind of very deep programs that they had. Colby was an interesting guy. Colby, very much a Cold Warrior, and had been involved in a whole lot of things. But Bill had a deep kind of commitment to Christianity in the form of Catholicism. And he felt very strongly about the ethics that are associated with Catholicism. So when they called him up into the testimony on this Senate committee and started to systematically ask him questions about what was going on inside, he literally went back to his people in the agency and said, "Tell us, make me a list of all of our jewels, the hidden things that we just really don't want to tell anybody about, that we've had forever." And I don't know the mechanics of quite how it happened, but that they became the subject of systematically of this discussion. So on one of these times, Frank Church said to Bill Colby, this is in 1975, he says, does the CIA have any people that are on staff, that are paid, that are on staff with the media in the United States? And Colby said, "Yes, sir, we do." And Church said, "Well, how many are they?" And he said, "Well, there's at least 800." He kind of hedging himself on the low end. And then and they said, "So, and what do they do for you?" And Colby said, "Well, they promote articles and stories that we want promoted, and they kill stories and things that we want killed." And that became the beginning of kind of an unpacking. And 2 years later, what you had is books starting to come out about all of the things that the CIA did, and particularly in terms of manipulating kind of information. As it turns out, those people who are on the inside and follow this stuff closely with the intelligence community now estimate that fully, probably a third of the agency's budget It goes to maintaining and supporting and paying these individuals who are within the media all around the world. And that's estimated that maybe there's 2,500 of them by now, and that they have systematically infiltrated and found their way into all of the major media throughout the world. The kind of degree and the depth in which the intelligence community has infiltrated the media is really quite extraordinary. They clearly were at the beginning of kind of funding Google and Facebook and any number of other of the social media platforms. When Jeff Bezos decided that he wanted to buy the Washington Post for $800 million. It turns out that he got about an $800 million contract from the CIA for information technology, web support kind of services. He just got a multi-billion-dollar contract a week ago, and so on. And so you wonder if for someone who would be listening to this and say, oh, I can't believe that, all of the media, the mainline media is controlled. You just haven't been doing your homework because this has been a systematic kind of approach from a long time ago. The importance of that is that none of us really know what we know, we think we know, and we certainly don't know what we don't know. Everything that we think we know is essentially in the areas that we're talking about here, about what's going on in the world and geopolitics and such, are all mediated. They all come through the media in one way or another. I mean, I don't know anything for sure that's going on outside of what I can see right now. And then you can make all kinds of arguments about whether that's manipulated in some way. But so the fact is that if you can control and you can manipulate and shape the media, and particularly if people don't know that it's happening and they believe the outlets, the media, then what you do is you have captured, of course, their whole kind of reality. And there are a great number of people in the world today whose whole reality has been captured by this system that has been systematically put in place over time. There's also questions about whether the truth can come out through things like the judiciary and there's very good reason to believe. I certainly got my start in politics in Chicago, and let me tell you, in Chicago and Richard Daley, Chicago, it was very clear that if you wanted to control things, you got the judges, right? And if you selected the judges or got the judges, so then you could kind of control the output out of the back end of the thing. And so there are things like, the headline here, these are some things I just picked up this morning. The judiciary refuses to rule on the 2020 elections. They keep saying that it's a baseless conspiracy theory, and they won't even consider the multiple kind of lawsuits that are being brought to kind of expose this, because if they take on the lawsuit, then it gives a chance for discovery and so on. And it's, as we all know, it's even more acute as it works its way down through social media.
The role of information, what is it in shaping public perspective and opinion? How do we know what's true? I think the truth is in the eye of the beholder. So I don't think people today have any idea what it's like to have impartial news presented. This side says this side says that. You draw your own conclusions. They're being pushed toward the conclusion or only being handed one side, and so the propaganda lies by both commission and omission. And that when the media is owned by special interests, it just that's the end of what I'm going to call truth. So the question of how do we know what's true, it's not possible right now. And what that drives us toward is either we decide what we're doing with that information or we don't. It either pushes us to rise above it all or we go with the flow. We either say, this is the kind of world I want, or we say, nah, I got stuff to do. I don't really care what's happening out there. Couple of things I would say. I've always liked this quote by Isaac Asimov. In a democracy, my ignorance is as good as your knowledge. And so it doesn't matter in a democracy. And that's one of the things I hear. I never hear the word republic, except by, very few people. Everybody's talking about, got to preserve the democracy, got to save the democracy. Well, a democracy is just mob rule, and you get a voice. And the voice is drowned in 6, 7, 8 billion other voices. And so nobody's listening. So what is the point of having a voice in a democracy? Especially when that can be manipulated.
Right.
So I think the role of information is twofold. One is to, quote, keep democracy alive, and that's what they're trying to do. And they want people to think that democracy is good enough. It doesn't have to be a republic, and it certainly, by God, doesn't have to be self-governance. That's the last thing they want. And then the other thing is that the role of info, I think, is supporting an underlying concept of ongoing education. In other words, things change. You have to continuously educate yourself. And the people who know that are using that media to constantly re-educate ourselves without ever putting us in a re-education camp or without having to admit what they're doing, etc.
I think we don't realize enough that we are in a space of mass suggestibility. That's what the psychological space is. And we have to realize that there are forces, and there are hidden forces and influences and impulses which are manipulating us all the time. It's just that we are under the false illusion, which is the delusion that the information we receive is credible. It's coming only from, let's say, uncorrupted sources, i.e. you receive information. There's no subliminals in that. There's no NLP. There's no propaganda. It's pure information. I receive the information. Does it sound good to me? Do I trust it? Do I want to believe it? And you make an informed decision, but that's a very two-dimensional way to consider information. That's maybe the old way. When way back in the past, people received information, it was uncorrupted. And so all you had to do was make a choice. Do you believe the information or do you not? That relationship between a person and information no longer exists because we are receiving information on multiple layers of the transmission. One is the content, but that's a small part of it. The other bit is, like I said, how is it being transmitted? The subliminals message, the deliberate kind of manipulations of words that subtly get under the skin. We hear a word and we hear a phrase, but we don't realize the psychological manipulations beneath that. And we need to, I think, first have an awareness that human beings are in a totally different environment now. And there's the technological hardware environment, which is developing so fast, human psychology has not caught up with it yet, has not adapted sufficiently. And I think that is the kind of discrepancy. And we're still in that kind of believing mode. So first off, I would say we need to be aware that first, mainstream information particularly is coming through corrupted channels. And again, people may say, well, media all can't be lying to us, because we don't realize that behind the media, there are centralized control. Like most of the media in the Western world is controlled by 6 giant conglomerates. And these, and where do they get the information from? I think we're under the delusion that a person, a reporter goes out there, does the field work, does the leg work, gets the proper original research, and then presents it to you. This is still very archaic, but we're under that impression, I think, when we believe journalists. No, most media channels get information from Reuters or Associated Press, two highly centralized news sources, and a reporter is given the job to put that out. And as you said, John, you mentioned about the CIA implanting their people. If people don't believe you, I would say go and look up Operation Mockingbird. And again, I would suggest that people maybe Google Quiet Weapons for Silent Wars. That's a document which explained a lot about psychological operations in information. The tech environment has a lot to answer for because, the tech people now have a kind of phrase which designates the manipulation of information to nudge people into desired outcomes. It's called choice architecture. In technology and in online environments, behind the scenes, whether it's Google or other big tech companies, they're nudging you to make behavior choices for desired outcomes. And I was just looking at this today, and I came across a statement by a leading Silicon Valley data scientist. And they said, and I quote, "Conditioning at scale is essential to the new science of massively engineered human behavior. We want to figure out the construction of changing a person's behavior, and then we want to change how lots of people are thinking about their day-to-day decisions." So we're in a kind of group formation, a mass formation, John. And just a final thing to say is that another thing to be aware of is that people think that they make decisions coming from themselves. It's a very big kind of ego shift to realize that we may not be making our own opinions. We may be receiving opinions and information, and then we take them as our own.
So, John, I know it's not the focus of this particular quartet, but the context is important. There is an effort to socially engineer our planet. It's not a single nation, but it is many nations being orchestrated by a relatively few number of people who are unelected officials. World Economic Forum is a beautiful example of that. And while that's been happening for decades, there are things that have changed. One of the things that's changed is in 2019, the World Economic Forum entered into an official agreement, signed the documents with the United Nations for the UN to actually implement many of the ideas that are coming out of the annual meetings for the World Economic Forum. And both of those organizations know that they cannot simply impose these ideas. So there is a very dangerous game that is playing out where information is being fed to the mainstream so that the mainstream thinks and believes in a way that the mainstream, we are making the choices that fit into the vision of this relatively few number of people. And the tactics, you all have described some of the tactics in terms of how this is being done. I think one of the best examples of how these tactics are playing out, there is it passed a few years ago, but Saul Alinsky he was a number of things. He was a social organizer. He wrote a very famous book called Rules for Radicals. And he had 13 rules, and the 13th rule summed this up really well. So I'm going to identify that 13th rule, and then we can apply it to answer the question, what do we do? And what Saul Alinsky says is if you want to bring about change in a social environment, he said what you want to do is pick the target. Number one, pick the target, freeze, isolate that target, then personalize that target, and then polarize that target. And that is precisely what is happening. It's been playing out for many years, where the the mainstream media, and by the way, Kingsley, I just researched this for a paper last week. The 6 corporations through the mergers and acquisitions are now nine corporations that own and control even more of our media, including the written media, the newspapers, as well as the media outlets. So there are 9 corporations that own the outlets that 99% of the people rely upon for their information. So what is happening is when the goal is to sway public opinion so that the public makes the choice that fits the ideas from these people behind the scenes, they will pick a target. It might be men against women. It might be blacks against whites. It might be Christians against Muslims. Right now in the United States, 2 of them we're going to see in these next few weeks is the abortion conversation and Second Amendment gun rights after the horrible killings that we've seen. So they're picking the targets that touch people's most primal instincts, where people are very, very charged emotionally, and they're providing the language that will feed into those emotions so that people will make those choices. And I think that the key is, and I agree, Penny, with what you said, we're not going to know what the absolute truth is. However, as the new human emerging into the new world where we are learning to develop and heighten our cognition and our senses, we know what's true for us. And this is where the deep intuition comes in. When we see an individual or a group being isolated and polarized, recognize it for what it is, and recognize how it makes us feel, and recognize that we are reacting in a way that is being triggered through the information as it's being fed to us. And one of the things we do about it, when they, for example, if they're going to throw a protest in DC, where this is going to be a very charged event, what happens if they throw a protest and nobody shows up? That's one of the ways we re-empower ourselves. So I think we have to go deep within and ask ourselves, not our minds, because our minds are driven by the ego and the ego stories, but the neural network that's been discovered in the human heart that thinks, feels, and remembers and responds independently of the brain. As we become more adept at developing this ancient information system of the human heart, we become really good at discerning. And I'm going to use that word intentionally. Discern, not judge, but discern what is true for us and what it means in our lives. And we begin to respond to life from that. We're unplugging from this mass, and I love this term, mass suggestibility.
We're out of time. And so let me summarize and say, and thank all of you who are viewing and who come and visit us each time. We very much appreciate it. This is one, as I said, of a number of projects and programs that we have here at the Arlington Institute. We have a speaker series called Transition Talks, and every month we bring somebody from around the world to come in and talk about some significant aspect of what's happening in the near future and how it's going to shape our options and how we live. Dr. David Martin is going to be with us on the 23rd of July. Dave Martin is going to talk about the guaranteed kind of collapse of the financial system in the United States, at least in 2027. He's been very, very accurate about these things in the past. And so it's, you can participate either here, come and visit us in our little resort town in Berkeley Springs. We'd love to have you. Or you can connect with online with live stream. And in any case, it's a whole series. Greg will be with us here in September. And so it'll be, it's a wonderful series, and you can find out more about it all at arlingtoninstitute.org. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another segment of Quartet. Thanks so much.